Welcome to Mount Olive Lutheran Church. Many of you are members here. We also have a number of guests, and this is part of, I'm Pastor Rob Frank, if you don't know me. This is one of the several events that we are having to build up to our 100th anniversary celebration next September. And so we have Wendy Grethen here, local historian, to have a little presentation on Duluth 100 years ago. There is a free will offering basket in the back to help offset her costs. We're glad to have her here. And also, there'll be some refreshments. And we are recording this, so this will be on our church's YouTube channel if you find it interesting and want to point to other people to view it at a later time or review it yourself. So we thank you for letting us record that, Wendy, and glad to have you here.
Stand on this side anyways. All right, well, good evening, everyone. And it's not a snowy night yet, but it sure does get dark early. But yeah, I am an amateur local historian. That Duluth has history, the Twin Ports has history, and it's just fun to dig into learning more about it and then sharing it. And people really are sharing old photos, and there's more digital databases, and there's things you can do right from your computer, let alone books published over time. So this task was looking at Duluth 100 years ago, but then also at the turn of the century. And to look before that, certainly other people, non-white people were here before us, the indigenous people. The Dakotas were here, and then the Ojibwe had moved into the area, and they called this area Onagamising, where the Little Portage is what this area is known to them. And then we had Sir Greysolon de Lutte coming in the 1600s, a French person, and and that's where we get our name of the town, as well as Duluth, Georgia, which I did get a visit in June, is also named because of his name. And then just to throw out another name, George Stuntz. Has anyone heard of George Stuntz? So there is a grave marker at Oneota Cemetery, and just that he was someone who went forward with a lot of ideas and was involved in a lot of different things. And he was considered the first white settler for Duluth and for Superior. And then the Merritt brothers and the whole Merritt family. This I thought was a neat quote that I found this week, that his family arrived at the Stuntz dock out on Minnesota Point in October 1856, and he wrote, "I wish you could have seen how beautiful the head of the lakes looked at that time. The Indians were there with wigwams scattered up and down Minnesota and Wisconsin Point, with smoke curling from the tops of the wigwams, and their canoes skimming along the waters of the bay and hauled up on shore. Tall pines and hardwood trees were growing on the hillside and down to the water's edge. And when the leaves of the hardwoods turned as they were in the fall, what a beautiful sight it was. I have many times wished that I had a picture as it looked then, or a gift of language to describe the beauty of the head of the lakes as I saw it as a boy of 9 years old." So it left a mark on more people, and they chose to stay. Some got to visit, and some chose to stay. So some glimpses of old photos, 1893. Here, this is almost where the deck is. The deck is made on fill, lots of fill, but there used to be more access of water going in. So building on the shoreline, building up the hill, and some of the trees were definitely removed as more buildings went in, homes and businesses. Having the downtown access through the trolley cars, people could come from the neighborhoods and come in to shop and to work. And also just a background on Duluth. Here, the seal of Duluth has I'll test, can't really see the little red marks, but all these little dots in here, those stars represent 11 town sites that were put together for Duluth. So here Duluth is a long town. Well, we had Fond du Lac, it was separate. There was Oneota, it was separate. Belleville, which is where part of Lakeside today, was Belleville. Minnesota Point had Cowles Addition, Fremont. So all these different town sites came together and formed Duluth. So I think for this area, Indian would be the one. So I'm going to go forward and just do a little bit about people, a little bit about services, a little bit about business life, and then leisure and culture. To look at how many people were around 100 years ago, well, in 1900, Duluth had about 53,000 people, and it went up in 1910, and it went up in 1920, and it went up in 1930. It kept growing and growing, people coming to the area and staying. The U.S. population, just for a glimpse of 1920 versus today, had about a third of the people and about a fourth of the world population back then. But for Duluth, it was growing and growing, more people settling. Some were created businesses, created jobs. And then I did put in Superior on the other side of so over in Superior, its population also went up, and then it's lower today, just like Duluth doesn't have 100,000 people. And to look at the national leaders at the time, William McKinley. McKinley was the president, but then he was assassinated in 1901. Then Theodore Roosevelt became president, and Taft, and then Wilson. But Wilson had suffered a stroke, and it was actually his wife that was doing presidential duties. So we the comment was we sort of had a woman president back then. And also with women got the right to vote in 1920. For significant events that affected more our area, the opening of the Sioux Locks, having that access of Duluth connected to the ocean was quite significant, and it opened in June 1855. Immigrants came from multiple different European countries, other countries, coming in by boat, by train. The Merritt family discovering iron ore and recognizing it as something people might want. And then for the period of 1918, three biggie things happening at once. The Great War, World War I, the fires from Cloquet that started and did come to Duluth, and other areas that affected people in Duluth, but then also the displaced people, when their homes burned in Cloquet and different areas, they came to Superior, they came to Duluth to temporarily be here until their homes could be restored. And then the flu was going on too, which was creating hospital needs and deaths. Already in those time periods, there were newspapers published, multiple ones. The Duluth Minnesotian began in 1869. There was an Evening Herald, onto the regular Herald, a Ripsaw, Duluth Tribune, Duluth Weekly Tribune, different publications. So people would pick up a paper, and that would be the way they could learn about world news and local news. And not all newspapers were in English. People spoke their language, and some were published then in their language. There's a Finnish paper. For the way of life, just basics of living, children went to school, and many elementary schools were located all around Duluth, and then the Grand Central High School built down in downtown opened 1882, and more things were installed over time. A nice clock tower, But many features of labs, music room, gym, a library with a fireplace, 2-story auditorium, and all this grand features for the students. Also, people had churches. They had their beliefs that they had, and some were held in different languages. So you could have a Swedish school, Swedish church, Norwegian church, German, Polish. Different churches were set up for people so the services could be held in their native tongue. Even African American church. And then not only by nationality, but then also by religion. So there were lots and lots of churches when you also put in Catholic, Episcopalian, all the different Lutheran, different churches. So having some in different languages and different religions. For instance, one of them, 1896, was Sacred Heart Cathedral, and it was a big church and you can go in there now as a concert hall, but it had a big pipe organ and easily visible on the hill, different towers. Although not that long ago, if anyone saw the church on 5th Street, that did get struck by lightning and has lost one of its little peak towers. And then for schools, here's one of the many, many schools, Indian School. Now it's apartments, but it was a school that ran for 87 years. Students coming in, learning, and walking to school. 1890. And part of a theme when I was doing more of this research, I had some information, but to pull this time period and kind of Duluth in general, it kept turning into already here. Already Duluth had this, already Duluth had this, already. So already here were homes. The Congdon Mansion was built, the Ordine residence. So in the Congdon area, which what we know today as the Congdon neighborhood, lots of the big mansions. As people were wealthy, they had money, they built big residences. McDougal, he was the person for the shipbuilding, and he also had a big residence. All these are within blocks of here. Some people lived in multi-unit dwellings. Here's the Munger Terrace, 1891 to 92. People resided in that, and it had its share of fancy features and using some of the local brownstone rock. Quarrying was another activity that was done to build some of these big buildings. They were able to harvest the brownstone rocks. It had central steam heat, running water, electric lighting, so it had some extra features. And then houses had to deal with things like accessing coal and having a coal chute. I know our house in Lakeside is over 100 years and it has its own little coal chute. Does anyone have can you see your little coal chute door on your foundation area? So ours has it. Ice was delivered because refrigeration wasn't available yet, so chopping up ice and having the delivery of ice and different foods. Here's a ad for Fleischmann yeast, if anyone bakes with that. So this is 1914, and the many bakeries that used that yeast. Zinsmaster employed a bunch of people. So that bread and many bakeries, local bakeries, used the yeast. Now we're going to look at what was already here in terms of transportation. And transportation can be on land, but it also can be on the water. And the lighthouses on land helped the ships on the water. This is the lighthouse on Minnesota Point, which today you don't see the building, the house part, but there was a lighthouse keeper there back in 1858. And then the lighthouse, the light tower, and there's just a remnant of the tower today. But coming to the Duluth were these sailing ships, big sailing ships, and the fur, the different goods were brought to the rest of the world and the lighthouse helped to protect the ships from, because it wasn't always sunny in Duluth, we know that. And so it was red brick painted white, and it isn't right at the end of the point. Has anyone hiked out to it? That you can go to it. Now it's in a fence, and it is crumbling down. But what else about it is it was called 0 Point, and the map makers, for some reason, chose a sandbar. The feature to the location of this lighthouse was put as 0 Point, the basis for all maps to be based on, a sandbar. So that's why it wasn't at the end of the point, and the sand does change over time, the roads. Another lighthouse we all are familiar with, it came much, much later, 1910, and it's on the National Register. Postage stamps have been made of it. It had multiple lighthouse keeper houses, and it was functioning till '69. And the reason why it was built there and the need for it became clear was after a storm in 1905, and I'll have a slide on that storm. But also trains. Trains were part of transportation, and bringing the tracks from the Twin Cities and just connecting the whole U.S. with tracks. So the Olive Bridge combines both tracks and then also for vehicles out in Gary, New Duluth area. 1916. And then also, so speaking of trains, we have the big train depot, and it had 7 rail lines with 5,000 passengers a day, 26 trains a day. So very active. And it had the building we're familiar with, and then a train shed in the back to give a little shelter for the people boarding the trains. So people might come by carriage to get there or be dropped off there. And again, 1890s, 1892, you check the paper for the schedule. Here was a newspaper, 1911, of you can get on the Twin Ports Express, the Bruton Express, the Duluth-Winnipeg line, and the times and departures. Another train was the incline, the car that went up the hill, which was part for people's work, how they could get to work or get to another part of town. It wasn't a tourist thing. It was for, instead of who wants to walk up the hill, wouldn't you rather go on an incline? So it functioned from 1891 to 1939. And then some depots existed, and here we've moved them. Many buildings, as I've done research over time for different things at Duluth, buildings have been moved. And this was a depot that's moved into Canal Park now, but it used to be at 15th Avenue East and South Street, but was moved into Canal Park. 1899 is when it was built in the nice sandstone, brownstone. And then for transportation, here are canal. People like to go to the canal. Well, people lived out on Minnesota Point, and to get from the mainland to the point, after the canal was widened, you'd go by rowboat, a ferry boat, rowboat. 1871 would take people across. Then a suspension bridge was developed to use, but in the winter, so it was used in winters for foot traffic. You had to pay to go across the bridge, 5 cents. 1905, the suspension carriage was built, and it was quite large, accommodating 350 people and carriages, and took a minute to cross the hanging gondola. And then 1929, 1930 was the first lift of the lift bridge version. And then near that whole area are more lighthouses, or lights, to help navigation for ships. The North Pier one is 1910. The one with the red roof was from 1874. And one shines red light, one shines green light. And I did a talk earlier this week, actually in the early days of Minnesota Point, to a group, and someone asked about the foghorn, and I didn't have a slide on the foghorn, so now I have a slide on the foghorn, and it's like, oh, I'm going to use it today. So the foghorn goes back to 1885, making a sound when there's fog. In 1915, steam-powered twin whistles were installed and replaced the locomotive whistles, which in turn were replaced in 1923 by electrically powered twin-type diaphone horn that had the deep BO sound, and it could be heard for 20 miles. So certainly people out here in Lakeside would be hearing it. And almost immediately, though, Duluthians complained, and the horn was too loud, it rattled windows, it woke people up at night. So with those complaints in 1968, the Coast Guard finally said that's it and retired the horn. And there's a much quieter one that replaces it today that has a little deep toot. The deep toot is missed, but today's sound is called a peanut whistle. So it's a trade-off. Do you want a loud sound? But then it turned into people wanting their own way of getting around when they wanted, and they would buy their own cars, and car salesmen came, car gas stations, tire repairs. It just led to a whole bunch of more businesses from that. For services that were already here, since 1888, Duluth had a city hall and jail on Superior Street, 3rd East Superior Street, the lower side. And so it had that, but then it outgrew those. And the Civic Center area was developed, the one that we have Pridely Circle with the fountain. And of those 4 buildings there, which one do you think was built first? Between the city hall, the county, the federal, and the jail. The jail sort of sits behind it. Which one came first?
Jail.
Close, that was second. Courthouse first, 1909. So the one straight up when you look up the hill. 1921 was the jail. 28 was the city hall, and the federal 29. So city services and county and federal. And then with the city, there were parks. People fortunately recognized public space is important. Yes, people were moving in and we wanted people to have homes, but we also wanted to have available areas up the hill, on top of the hill, by the shore, that we wanted to keep as parks for everyone to enjoy. Cascade Park is a remnant of it is left when you go up Masaba. You see a little bit of it. But it was a much more substantial park and enjoyed. Picnicking was a fun activity. Lafayette Square on Minnesota Point was one of the first parks, and a small park, but still public space, and led to different activities for kids, for all ages of people. Portland Square, Lincoln Park had a lot of activities, the big Swedish festival, the concerts, different things would happen at Lincoln Park. And there was a park commission set up. William Rogers was the first chair, and you might have heard of Rogers Boulevard. That was the start of Skyline Parkway, that he had the vision of, we have these spoke wheels of parks on all the streams, or on many of the streams of Duluth. Let's build a road that connects the top of them, so you can have scenic views of Duluth, the hillside, and then connecting park to park by a park boulevard. Mayor Snively donated some land and helped expand that project, and it was from one end of city, 7 Bridges Road, all the way to the other eventually. Hospitals, St. Mary's began in 1888 in the West End, and run by the sisters, the Benedictine sisters, and it was at 23rd and 2nd Street. And was quite a substantial big building, and medical care was definitely an important service to the community. And whether it was children requiring attention or injured people, anything. Here was an early ambulance, 1920. People would be loaded in to be brought to the hospital. This was a funny picture I found, 1935. Children were given fresh air and were brought out on the roof. So the whole area had the roof. 1945, which is quite a bit later, Girl Scouts are shown here washing the rubber gloves, because unlike today, our disposable society, there they reuse things. And then St. Luke's Hospital was also from the 1880s and has developed more buildings over time. And then there's also the cemetery situation. The Cook home had a cemetery vault, and there's different above ground burial or below ground burials. A person, Sarah Stearns, came up with the idea of had a passion for taking care of kids needing care in terms of housing, and she created a children's home up on 15th and 5th Street. I do some volunteering with delivering home delivered meals, and it's like one was into that building, and it's like, was this a school? What was that? And it's like, oh, it was a children's home. And it had opened in 1904. There were 47 children living there that needed homes. Parents, that's before World War I. Certainly after the wars, there was a greater need for children's homes too. St. James was another orphanage that it actually was first held in that building after St. Mary's hospital building in the West End. When they moved, that building became St. James Orphanage. Then it moved to Woodland area. We had a library since 1901, thanks to Andrew Carnegie, and quite a beautiful building, and it served until 1980. Stained glass windows, a copper dome, marble staircase, and then it had an addition added. Here's some inside views, the stairs. They're working on the dome now, but this was before of having just this inside view. Has anyone been in there when it was a library? Yeah, there's assorted offices in there now. Yep.
At least they preserved it.
Right. Yeah, in Superior.
They preserved the one in Anoka, that's all.
In Superior, they're working on it. That one was for sale, and someone bought it, and that I think will be offices too. Out near the Leicester River was a federal location of a fish hatchery, and it raised whitefish, lake trout, and other fish. And it still stands there. You can see the building, but all the fish bins are not there any longer. But that goes from 1888 is when that was there, and closed in 1946. Who was mayor back in the early 1900s? There was Clarence Magny, who later became a judge. But Magny worked with Snively, Mayor Snively, who was the longest term mayor in Duluth. He served 4 terms, and he was a big fan of orphans, and he would do different things with children. And then he also was a key person for Skyline Parkway development. For major businesses that were here and thriving at times, the lumber, different sawmills all along the river, having the water was a way to transport the materials. Real estate, a lot of the big homes are because people were involved with real estate. Having iron in our area and having the ore docks set up, ore docks began not 1983, 1883. That should be 1883. But having those, and then the U.S. Steel site being built 1913 through 15, employed a lot of people, created a lot of products that were used here and used to build Chicago, used to build New York, sent out to many other cities. Barbed wire, fencing, different things. Shipbuilding was done in Duluth Superior Harbor. Alexander McDougall from Scotland helped design different boats, and especially during the wartime, it had a lot of boats being built. Transportation of material, again, connecting the rails and the water as a way to transport the things. There is a nice program with the Meteor in Superior, the museum boat, one of the whale boats of McDougall's design, that in September they have McDougall's Dream. And you can go, and there's different talks about him. They even had sampling whiskey from Scotland one of the times. But they have different talks about his life, and he also was involved in Canada and different locations. But he went forward and built giant ships, some good-sized ships that transported a lot of goods. And the Meteor is the only one left today. Some have sunk. Here's a whaleback that the Thomas Wilson, which was built in 1882, 92, and sank in 1902, and it struck another boat. But so some of them served for whatever amount of time, and then they didn't find them to be that indestructible was the problem. So here the Split Rock Lighthouse is there because of this big Thanksgiving storm back in 1905. 44-mile-an-hour winds. This particular boat, the Mataafa, was headed out, and it had a barge with it, and it was going up to Superior, or going up to two harbors, and then realized, nope, this is too dangerous, too much waves, too much thing. So it turned back. It actually released the barge, trying to save itself, and it ended up not making it back into the safety of the harbor, but it was grounded just right off where people could see it, just off the Minnesota Point. So people could not save the people on it, though. All the rescue people came, but it would have been too dangerous for them to go save them. So they spent the night in the cold, chilly conditions. And here's an account of that day. When the ship broke in two, 12 men were in the aft portion. 3 of them struggled to the forward portion. The remaining 9 remained aboard the aft portion and died of exposure during the night. One of the bodies in the aft half had to be chopped out of solid ice. The 15 men in the fore half fared better, although rescue attempts were futile during the stormy night. The next day, a small boat made it out, and all 15 were taken off in 2 boatloads. So that storm, the Mataafa, supposedly had about 10,000 people standing on the shore, basically in current Canal Park, seeing the distress and the broken boat, but no one could do anything about it. And then with that storm, there were actually about 30 ships in trouble because of the storm. And the comments for what was happening to the ships: grounded, broken up, hard aground, sunk, broken in 2, pounded to pieces. So they really took a beating with the heavy winds and the waves. I read this book a summer ago by Kurt Brown. He works with the newspapers in the Twin Cities, and so terrible a storm, and it takes you through minute by minute of the people like on the Mataafa, what they were trying to do to, what could they burn to create some warmth, how could they survive the night, because they knew no one was going to come rescue them. It was just too dangerous for them. So there's different books where you can read more about it. So already here, different businesses, and in the downtown we had the Allworth building, built in 1909, the tallest commercial building in Minnesota, from 1910 to 1914 until the Twin Cities had some taller buildings. The Board of Trade opened 1895. Many small businesses. And then Duluth has what's called a commercial historic district with over 80 properties, all built from 1872 to 1929. There were businesses making trunks, businesses making carriages or selling carriages, many different things of whatever people might buy. The companies came up with it. This is a building built in 1875. It was the Moe Bakery, and it's next to the Portland Malt Shop, the building. People get their malts to the right in this, but that building, it has different exterior and everything, but it's from 1875. People could get fashionable hats from local millineries. People could get furs trapped, and from lynx to fox to marten furs. You could get music from phonographs, dictaphones, a melody shop. You can get artwork, or you can get your carriage painted, and then there also was an art one. Another building that was for business, 1909, was the DeWitt Seitz building, which was a mattress manufacturer. As far as culture and entertainment, Duluth had a very well-attended, popular grand opera house, starting in 1883, Temple Opera in 1889, Orpheum Theater with vaudeville programs, and eventually moving picture movies, and that became later the Playhouse. There was the Armory, which was for training purposes, but then also served as a location for different events because we didn't have the convention center early on, so that's where there'd be different events. And there were people putting on events, a carnival. You could take a boat ride out to Fond du Lac on the steamer Columbia. You could go to many of these different opera houses. And just for a look at the music of the time, Let Me Call You Sweetheart was the number one. America the Beautiful, Light of the Silvery Moon. And then here was even 1871 was an ad in a newspaper I was browsing, was a fundraising event at the Grand Army Hall, and having a band, a glee club, musical association, so whether people were playing instruments or singing, they found ways to have fun. There was an event that brought in this lark, the Lark of the Lake. It was a plane that would fly, but then it could also land on water. So a flying boat, the Lark. There was a little restaurant that was called the Lark in honor of this in Graceland. And does anyone know what the very, very early amusement park was near the end of Park Point? Or not, near the end of where you could drive on Park Point? White City, inspired by the World's Columbia exhibition. It opened as the first amusement park in Duluth at 39th Street, and a ferry would help bring more and more people to it, the double-decker ferry. And what it had, pavilion, cafe, restaurants, bandstand, miniature railroad, burlesque performers, Mystic River boat ride, gypsy village, deer, and in time different things. So it opened 1906, and it closed in 1908. So it didn't last that long, but then it reopened as Joyland, but then it closed. But eventually, some 30 years later almost, it became Minnesota Point Amusement Zone and had some more recreation activities. And then there were flying scooters and a mini steam locomotive, Dodgem cars, a carousel. But it eventually had too much disrepair and went away. A lot of activity was done with the boat club. It was a very high attended, functions would go on there, dancing and banquets, and people could enjoy the water there, rowing, sailing, swimming. The Kitchigami Club formed in the 1880s, but had its building built in 1911, the one that you see on Superior Street. And so that's also on the National Register of Historic Places. Here's some inside views. Hotels. Here we think we have a lot of hotels today. There were a lot of hotels in the early 1900s. Even 1889, Hotel Spalding, Hotel Holland, Adelphi, Imperial, Hotel McKay, Blanchard Hotel, Lincoln Hotel. People, when they came, needed a place to stay. Some were coming to where relatives had already come, but some didn't, and they were the first arriving to Duluth, and they would stay here. Plus there was some visitors coming too. Hotel Duluth, also being built with 450 rooms, and the fancy Moorish room. Opened in 1925. Hotel St. Louis. And then already here were different recreation activities. We had Skyline Parkway, and people would do with horses, and this was further back in time, and go out on horses and be out enjoying the view. And then this bridge was in Leicester Park called the Rustic Bridge, and it was built in 1897 and dismantled in 31. There's a display of Skyline Parkway at the Marine Museum and at the Thompson Hill Visitor Center that my husband Terry and I made, and that has the different parts of the parkway built over time. Baseball. Desmond Park was on Minnesota Point, and it was a place in 1913, baseball and a swimming pool, and it was only for men and boys, but it did have some days that women and girls were allowed. Had a big water slide, had different things. And the comment was, it was named after Mr. Desmond and donated in part by him, and develops morals, muscles, and manners of young boys. But Duluth also had professional baseball going on here. Professional teams started in 1886. There were 87, 91. The Duluth White Sox is what they were called. They were part of the Northern League, and then eventually the athletic park and Wade Stadium were built. Here were the uniforms, we had different ones. And in 1908, the #1 song was Take Me Out to the Ball Game. Golf, Northern Country Club started 1899. We had Edgar and Leicester municipal courses being added in time. And then just to end with a little bit of things that you can see today still that might make you think back to the people that came before us. First, to recognize 1920, this situation that happened of lynching 3 black men, and over 10,000 people were supposedly part of that intense situation. You can go through the cemeteries, Park Hill, Forest Hill, they're from the 1880s, and they have many of the early settlers, the Congdons, the Whiteside, different ones. And some of the people buried here weren't buried there originally. Some were buried on Minnesota Point, then moved to near Chester Creek, right by Chester Creek and 4th Street. Then they wanted to develop that area, so they moved them again. And then eventually their final resting place is up here. So you can look over and be on Skyline Parkway yourself and look back and look down and see the ore docks, see some of the part of what we call Duluth and what people before us called Duluth. You can go on a hike and see spillage of taconite pellets. All the little round, like blueberries, are taconite pellets, and as there's a shipment by the railroad, it jiggles and overflows, and you can find thousands and thousands of them in Duluth. You can go on a walk near Mount Royal, and I've seen this house before with the columns, and there was a car parked in front, so I went up to it, and a woman came out, and I said, "Oh, do you know who built this house and when it was?" And "Oh, it was built in 1900. And who lived there was Dwight Woodbridge, who wrote a book on the history of Duluth and St. Louis County. So he wrote that book back in 1910, and so there's a person who is capturing the history in 1910 for that. So it's at the library. And then here, the depot, you can take the tourist train part of it, but recognize it really was a massive active place, and you can stop in the immigrant room that they have set up there. And it's not just Duluth. Superior has plenty of history there. The Fairlawn Mansion. Superior, the Douglas County Historic Society does a nice history thing that they go to their graveyard, the Greenwood Graveyard, and the acting students dress up like the person buried there, and you learn. So it's called a plot in every story, a story in every plot, a story in every plot, and they become the person, the former mayor, Pattison. They become the people, the person who's in the Baseball Hall of Fame, the first police officer, sergeant, chief, and so that you can learn more that way. You can go to the candy shop and see different old-time candy that was available back in there. I just recently bought a cotton candy machine, and cotton candy is from 1887, 97. And does anyone know the original, what cotton candy was called originally? Ferry floss. Ferry floss. So I have 10 flavors that I can make cotton candy. So 100 years ago, just for another little ending, but going on a little bit more, these were some things invented 100 years ago. The traffic signal, Band-Aids, water skis, frozen food, vacuum cleaner, television. People did not have televisions readily until much later, but it was developed. Even at Super One, you can see the label, 100 years ago, made in the USA, shaving cream. So what they did not have, they didn't have TV, so they used their newspapers much more, eventually radio. There wasn't wastewater treatment early on, and then didn't have computers, cell phones, all the things we're spoiled with today. They didn't have M&Ms. They're only 75 years old. 41. So yeah, there are a lot of different resources of learning more. There's Facebook groups out there where people come across different old-time photos, and some of it was their grandfather worked at such and such place. And it's called Old Duluth, Old Superior Facebook group. There's a newspaper hub through the Minnesota Historical Society, Digital Reflections. That's basically the UMD library where you used to have to go into it. Now they digitized a whole lot more, and you can look up the streetcar trolley schedule. You can look up many different things, and it's not just Duluth, it's other areas. And lots of websites, books. For a little bit on prices, 15 cents for a movie, 70 cents for a meal at a diner, car for $500. New, shiny, probably black. For just a comment, I've produced some other programs on local history, starting with Lakeside. I live in Lakeside, early days of Lakeside, and I just was curious and was asking more and interviewed a bunch of people, and then I wanted to learn how to make a video. So it's online. If you go look up Early Days of Lakeside Duluth, you can watch it. It's like 35 minutes. I then made one on the West End, Lincoln Park, video online. You can watch it. Early Days of Minnesota Point, that one's still PowerPoint. And then I have one on the historic places, the places that are on the National Register of Historic Places. And then I am working on one on Gary, New Duluth. Slowly, I've been to the churches, I've been to some places. So that may turn into a video at some point. The people that were, Morgan Park has his own history, and Gary, New Duluth, was right next to the steel plant, but had people that weren't allowed to live in Morgan Park. And as a quick mention of other things I do a newsletter in Lakeside I've been doing for 9 years, and that I include some history when I find out more things. Organizing some local made things, local art fairs, doing day trips that goes to arts, music, history, and nature. Like we went to Charles Lindbergh's home, boyhood home in Little Falls, and some different things, and then I play the dulcimers. So the comment came up that one of the popular songs way back when was the Take Me Out to the Ball Game. So if anyone wants to sing it, here is the chorus for it. And I'm not a singer, but anyone want to try it? On a Friday night singing a 1908 song?
We could all sing it together.
Yep, well, I'm going to take the microphone away from my, so they don't hear me. So let's go. Take
me out to the ball game, take me out with the crowd, buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if I never get back, let me root for the home team. If they don't win, it's a shame, or it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game.
Do you know why Duluth was called the Steel City? And when that happened?
I think Duluth just saw itself as being a mega place because it had so much going for it. Chicago's down there, it's Duluth that was going to be a big thing. So I think Zenith was meaning, the top, that eventually, definitely Chicago surpassed Duluth in population and more activity going on there. But I think it was just, there were millionaires here, people had mansions, and so when there was that, and then they could invest in more things. But you're on a hill and you have minus 40-degree weather, and you're near Canada. So I think just Zenith was just saying number one, viewing itself as up there.
You mentioned the Cloquet fire, and you said it came all the way to Lakeside?
Yep. And burned the golf course clubhouse down.
So did it burn any of Lakeside other than the clubhouse?
Yeah, it depended which way the wind blew. Our house was built in 1916, and we're kind of on the other side of the golf course, and it has burn marks in our attic, and then the siding was switched to asbestos fire
Did it
produced.
go up the North Shore at all, past Lakeside?
The Lakewood Township had a 100th anniversary for the fire a few years ago, and someone was trying to map, so from collecting stories and different things, and created more a detailed map of it burned here, it didn't burn here, it burned here. So yes, it did go into Lakewood. And I was saying,
It was in Clover Valley.
Yeah, I think it burned down our property where we have our house now. And that's off of Berquist Road.
yeah, so it went up that,
Yeah, so our trees are 100 years old.
what is his name,
Some of
Matson?
those.
Matson is his last name, who made the digital map.
Dwayne.
Oh,
Dwayne
sure.
Dwayne was collecting people's comments. And yeah, I had mentioned earlier today, yeah, someone did sewing as her work, and the fire was coming, and she buried it so her sewing machine wouldn't get burned, and it survived. So that was clever of her to think of protecting it by burying it.
Do you know what year that library, downtown library, closed as a library?
The Carnegie one,
Yes.
it was on there.
I thought it said
1980.
1975,
When?
80.
or was it
80.
80?
Did I miss it? There.
There it is.
There.
Served until near 1980.
What changed between that one and the current library? It's
But
like-
yeah, it did not have, as far as I know, it doesn't have an elevator and then has
Beautiful.
definite steps, so.
That
Have you
same
been
floor
there?
plan was built all over the
One of
country.
you gets an office building now. But,
Well, it was one of 65 built in Minnesota from Carnegie. I don't know the layout of one to the
The
other.
one in Paris, Illinois looked just like that.
Really?
Yep.
Well, there's several in New Zealand. Hokitika, New Zealand, on the west coast, on the South Island, has one that's also not a library anymore. Was a tourist information center, and it had a grandness to it. I don't think it was the sandstone. This was local material being used for it, so I don't know if other places use their local material. Yeah, that sandstone. There were quarries out in Fond du Lac, and then also Pattison Park, or what's the other park we hiked at, had
Did
some.
the stone from here come from Ashland,
Washburn.
Washburn?
Washburn, yeah.
Well, there's the state park, is it Amnicon Falls? Amnicon Falls has a hike you can do, and then you're in an old quarry too, and it had a little remnant of a railroad track, because that's heavy to move. And yeah, a lot of the logging was done in the winter, and the horses would move. We just went to Tom's logging camp just recently it does have local history there, but how much winter, using the slippery snow, and the horseshoes for the horse had cleats in them basically that they could walk along, and then the heavy load could be moved along by the horses in the winter. But yeah, there's definitely, when you look at Duluth and the many, many, many historic buildings, it's kind of fun to really put a date. Oh, that's 1800s, not just early 1900s for some of them. That. So any other questions or comments of something that you didn't know about? So hopefully everyone learned something today, and yeah, if you want to learn more about Lakeside or West End, you can watch the videos online, and they're as DVDs in the library. But then if anyone knows about Gary New Duluth and wants to share that, I've interviewed some people with the schools and different things, but each neighborhood, Duluth had those town sites, but it also very much has neighborhoods, and the neighborhood church and the neighborhood school and the neighborhood thing, and the people that settled there. Here, the diversity of people. When I did the West End video, that project, there really was a Swedish church, Norwegian church, and that they're within blocks of each other, but they were separate.
Well, did you know that this property here was the site of the trolley car sheds and horse stables?
Oh, no, I didn't know that.
And then this church was built as Trinity Cathedral back in 1905, I believe.
I was walking up Woodland Avenue, and someone said one of those houses was a depot, an old depot building. The one. So yeah, that buildings live on in a different format, in a different use function. none of this building is part of the actual
No, no.
material of it, though, no?